June 6, 2015. 5:30 a.m. Clinton Correctional Facility, Dannemora, New York. A correctional officer named John Stockwell walks down the dimly lit corridor of the honor block, the section reserved for inmates with good behavior. He's doing the morning count, cell by cell. Routine. He reaches cell 23. Checks the bunk. Empty. He blinks. Looks again. The inmate, Richard Matt, a convicted murderer, should be asleep. But the lump under the blanket looks wrong. Stockwell pulls back the covers. It's not a person. Its clothes arranged to look like a sleeping body. A dummy head made from sweatshirts. His heart stops. He runs to the next cell. Cell 22. Same thing. Another dummy. Another empty bed. David Sweat, the second inmate, is also gone. Stockwell hits the alarm. Within seconds, the entire facility locks down. Guards flood the area. They search the cells. And that's when they find it. A hole, cut into the back wall of Richard Matt's cell. Behind a poster. The hole leads to a crawlspace, then to a steam pipe, then to a tunnel, then to a manhole outside the prison walls. Two convicted killers, one who murdered and dismembered his boss, another who shot a sheriff's deputy in the face, had cut through steel walls, crawled through tunnels, and vanished into the night. And they didn't do it alone. A 51-year-old married prison employee named Joyce Mitchell had given them the tools. Smuggled hacksaw blades hidden inside frozen hamburger meat. Fell in love with them. Planned to be their getaway driver. This is the story of the most shocking prison break in modern American history. And it started with a woman who just wanted to feel wanted. Joyce Tilly Mitchell wasn't supposed to be the woman in a prison escape story. She was born in 1964 in upstate New York. Grew up in a working-class family. Got married young to a man named Lyle Mitchell. They had a son together. Built a quiet life in the small town of Dickinson Center. Population 2,700. Joyce worked at Clinton Correctional Facility as a supervisor in the prison tailor shop. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid decent. Around $57,000 a year. She'd been there for 14 years. Never had any disciplinary issues. Showed up on time. Did her job. By all accounts, she was ordinary. A little overweight. Wore glasses. Liked crafts and her dogs. Had a husband who loved her. But somewhere in her late 40s, Joyce started feeling invisible. Her marriage had gone stale. Her son was grown and living his own life. She felt unappreciated, unwanted, old. And then two inmates in the tailor shop started paying attention to her. They complimented her, made her laugh, flirted with her, made her feel young and desirable again. Joyce later said it was like a drug. After years of feeling like nobody saw her, these men looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. She didn't think about what they were. Didn't care that one had tortured and killed his former boss. Didn't care that the other had murdered a cop. She just cared that they made her feel alive. Subscribe right now, because what Joyce did for these men, and how they manipulated her, will show you how prison romances actually work, and why they are more common than you think. Richard Matt was 48 years old when he met Joyce Mitchell. He'd been in prison since 1997 for one of the most brutal murders in New York history. In 1997, Richard kidnapped his former boss, William Rickerson, tortured him for 27 hours, strangled him, dismembered his body with a hacksaw, and dumped the pieces in the Niagara River. Why? Money. Rickerson owed him $100,000, and Richard wanted it. He fled to Mexico after the murder, got arrested there for another killing, eventually got extradited back to New York and sentenced to 25 years to life. But here's the thing about Richard Matt. He was charming. Incredibly charming. He was an artist, painted elaborate portraits of famous people. Guards would commission him to paint pictures of their families. He'd paint Elvis, Marilyn Monroe, whoever you wanted. The paintings were actually good. Really good. He had this ability to make people forget what he'd done. He'd crack jokes, tell stories, act like your buddy. And slowly, people would start thinking, maybe he's not that bad. Maybe he made one mistake. That's exactly what happened with Joyce. Richard started talking to her in the tailor shop, complimented her work, asked about her life, showed her his paintings, made her feel special. Joyce later told investigators, "He made me feel beautiful. My husband never did that anymore." Within months, Joyce Mitchell, a married grandmother, was having sex with Richard Matt in a storage closet at the prison. David Sweat was 34 years old, younger than Richard by 14 years, but just as dangerous. In 2002, when David was just 22, he and two friends broke into a house in Broome County, New York. They were looking for guns to steal, but a sheriff's deputy named Kevin Tasha pulled up to investigate. David shot Kevin Tasha in the face. Then, while Kevin lay dying on the ground, David shot him 16 more times. He ran over Kevin's body with a car, left him dead in the street. David was sentenced to life without parole. He'd die in prison. No chance of ever getting out legally. So he started planning to get out illegally. David was different from Richard. Richard was charismatic and outgoing. David was quiet, calculated, patient. He watched people, studied them, figured out their weaknesses. And when he started working in the tailor shop with Joyce Mitchell, he studied her. He saw a middle-aged woman who felt invisible, who wanted attention, who was vulnerable to flattery. So he gave her exactly what she needed: attention, compliments, the feeling that she mattered. Joyce later admitted to having a sexual relationship with David Sweat too, while also sleeping with Richard Matt, while still married to her husband. Two convicted killers, one naive woman, and a plan that would soon become national news. Clinton Correctional Facility's tailor shop is where inmates make prison uniforms, linens, and other textile products. It's one of the more desirable prison jobs because inmates can talk, move around relatively freely, and interact with civilian employees like Joyce Mitchell. Joyce supervised the shop. She wasn't a guard. She was a civilian contractor. That meant she didn't have the same training or security mindset as correctional officers. She saw the inmates as workers, not as predators. Richard Matt and David Sweat both worked in the tailor shop. They operated sewing machines, made uniforms, and they watched Joyce. They noticed she came to work early sometimes, that she'd be alone in the supply room, that security was lax because it was a low-risk work area, and they started their approach slowly. First, just friendly conversation. "How was your weekend, Mrs. Mitchell?" Nothing inappropriate. Just polite. Then personal questions. "You seem stressed. Everything okay at home?" Joyce started opening up, told them about her marriage problems, how Lyle didn't appreciate her anymore, how she felt invisible. Richard and David listened, sympathized, made her feel heard. Then came the compliments. "You look really nice today. You have a beautiful smile. I don't understand how your husband doesn't see how special you are." Joyce was starving for this kind of attention, and they fed her exactly what she was hungry for. It started with Joyce bringing in special food for Richard and David. Nothing major at first. Cookies from home, extra sandwiches, little treats that weren't allowed but seemed harmless. Then Richard started giving Joyce paintings, beautiful portraits he'd done. She'd hang them in her office, show them to her husband. Lyle Mitchell later said he had no idea the paintings were from an inmate who was sleeping with his wife. The sexual relationship with Richard Matt began first. Joyce later described it as happening in a storage room during work hours. Quick encounters when other workers were on break or distracted. She knew it was wrong, knew it was illegal, but she didn't care. "I felt wanted for the first time in years," Joyce told investigators. "It was like being a teenager again." Then David Sweat started making his move. He was more aggressive than Richard, more direct. He told Joyce he had feelings for her, that he couldn't stop thinking about her. Joyce started sleeping with David too. sometimes in the same week, sometimes in the same day. She was having sexual relationships with 2 convicted murderers, while married, while working as a prison employee. And it gets worse. Both inmates knew about each other. Richard and David weren't rivals. They were partners. They were playing Joyce together, and she was too intoxicated by the attention to see it. Sometime in early 2015, Richard and David sat Joyce down and told her their plan. They were going to escape. They'd been planning it for months. They had the route mapped out. They knew how to cut through the walls. They knew where the tunnels led. But they needed tools. Hacksaw blades, drill bits, chisels, things they couldn't get inside the prison. And they needed Joyce to smuggle them in. Joyce later claimed she initially refused, said it was too risky, too crazy. But Richard and David knew exactly how to manipulate her. "Don't you want to be with me?" Richard would ask. "Don't you love me?" David would add, "Once we're out, we'll be together. You, me, and Richard. We'll go to Mexico. Start a new life. You'll never have to go back to Lyle." They painted a fantasy. The 3 of them living in a beach house in Mexico. Free. Together. Happy. Joyce later admitted she believed them. Or wanted to believe them. Or convinced herself it could work. So she agreed. And that's when she started smuggling in the tools hidden in frozen hamburger meat. Here's how Joyce smuggled hacksaw blades into one of New York's maximum security prisons. She'd buy frozen hamburger patties from the grocery store, bring them home, thaw them partially, carefully separate the patties. Then she'd take hacksaw blades, thin, flat pieces of metal with teeth on one edge, and wrap them in plastic wrap. Slide them between the hamburger patties. Refreeze the meat. The next day, she'd bring the hamburger meat to work in her lunch bag. Security at Clinton Correctional was supposed to check employee bags, but they rarely did. Joyce had worked there 14 years. Nobody suspected her. She'd bring the meat into the tailor shop. During a private moment, she'd hand the package to Richard or David. They'd take it to the bathroom, extract the hacksaw blades, flush the meat down the toilet or hide it, and return the empty package to Joyce. Over weeks, maybe months, Joyce smuggled in multiple hacksaw blades, drill bits, chisels, lighted eyeglasses, for seeing in dark tunnels, possibly other tools, all hidden in frozen meat. It's absurd, almost cartoonish, but it worked. Because the one thing prison security doesn't expect is for a 51-year-old civilian employee with 14 years of clean service to be smuggling escape tools to convicted murderers she's sleeping with. While Joyce smuggled tools, Richard and David planned the escape route. Clinton Correctional Facility was built in 1845. It's old. The infrastructure is outdated. There are steam pipes, tunnels, crawl spaces, all kinds of areas that modern prisons don't have. Richard and David studied the layout. They had access to maintenance areas through the tailor shop. They'd memorize routes during work details, ask questions to maintenance workers, piece together a mental map. Their plan: cut through the steel wall in the back of their cells, crawl into the catwalk space behind the cells, access a steam pipe tunnel, cut through the steam pipe, follow the tunnel to a manhole outside the prison walls, emerge in the middle of the night, meet Joyce, who would be waiting in a getaway car. It was Shawshank Redemption come to life. Every night for months, Richard and David worked. They'd wait until after lights out, take the smuggled hacksaw blades, carefully, quietly cut through the steel wall behind their bunks. The walls were thick. The cutting was slow. The noise was dangerous. One guard walking by at the wrong moment, and it's over. But they were patient, methodical. They'd cut for an hour. Stop. Cover the hole with posters and paint. Make it invisible. Inch by inch, night after night, they carved their way to freedom. If this is the craziest prison escape plan you've ever heard, hit that like button. Because the escape itself, and what Joyce was supposed to do, gets even more insane. The plan was simple on paper but insane in execution. Joyce was supposed to Call in sick to work the day of the escape. Pick up Richard and David at a specific location outside the prison. At midnight, drive them 6 hours to an undisclosed location. Help them evade police. Eventually flee to Mexico with them. In return, Richard and David promised Joyce a new life. Romance, adventure, freedom from her boring marriage. Joyce later admitted she actually considered it. Actually thought about abandoning her husband, her son, her entire life to run away with 2 murderers. But as the escape date got closer, reality started creeping in. Joyce realized, wait, I'm about to commit a felony. I'm going to prison if I get caught. My family will be destroyed. And these men I'm in love with, they are convicted killers. What happens when they don't need me anymore? The fantasy started crumbling. A few days before the planned escape, Joyce told Richard and David she was having second thoughts. They didn't take it well. You promised, Richard said. We counting on you. Don't you love me? David was more threatening. If you back out now, we'll tell the authorities everything. You'll go to prison anyway. You're already in too deep. Joyce was trapped. She'd helped them for months, given them tools, had sex with them. She was absolutely complicit. But she still couldn't go through with being the getaway driver. So she made a decision that would seal her fate. June 5th, 2015. Evening. Richard, Matt, and David Sweat knew tonight was the night. They'd cut through the walls. The tunnel was ready. The manhole cover had been loosened on a previous night. Everything was set. Except Joyce. Joyce had told them earlier that day, I can't do it. I'm not picking you up. I'm sorry. Richard and David were furious, but they didn't have time to find another option. They'd been planning this for nearly a year. They were going, with or without Joyce. Around 11 p.m., they made their move. Richard cut through the last bit of wall in his cell, squeezed through the hole into the catwalk behind the cell block. David did the same from his cell. They met up in the dark crawl space, used their lighted glasses to navigate, crawled through tight spaces filled with pipes and wiring. They reached the steam pipe, a massive industrial pipe that ran from the prison to an outside building. Using the tools Joyce had smuggled, they cut through the metal pipe, squeezed inside, crawled through the pipe tunnel. It was hot, cramped, dangerous. One wrong move, one guard checking the tunnels, and they are caught. But nobody checked. After hours of crawling, they reached the manhole, pushed it open, emerged onto a dark street just outside the prison walls. They were free. Richard, Matt, and David Sweat left a note in their cells. Have a nice day. By the time guards discovered the dummies in their beds the next morning, the killers had a 6-hour head start. June 6, 2015. 5:30 a.m. The moment Correctional Officer John Stockwell found the empty cells, Clinton Correctional Facility erupted into chaos. Sirens, lockdowns, emergency protocols. Within an hour, every law enforcement agency in New York was alerted. New York State Police, FBI, Marshals, Border Patrol, local police departments. 2 convicted killers, one a murderer and torturer, one a cop killer, had escaped from a maximum security prison. The media descended on Dannemora within hours. National news, CNN, every major network. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo arrived at the prison personally. He toured the escape route, saw the cut walls, the tunnels, the manhole. He stood in front of cameras and said, this was sophisticated. This was elaborate. And they had help. Someone on the inside helped them. The manhunt began immediately. Roadblocks, helicopters, search dogs. Over 800 law enforcement officers deployed. The region went into lockdown. Schools closed. Residents told to stay inside. Armed checkpoints on every road. And investigators started asking, who helped them? How did they get the tools? It didn't take long to find the answer. Joyce Mitchell. June 12, 2015. 6 days after the escape, investigators had been interviewing prison employees. Cross-checking phone records. Reviewing surveillance footage. Joyce Mitchell's name kept coming up. Inmates mentioned seeing her alone with Matt and Sweat. Staff noticed she seemed nervous, distracted. Police brought Joyce in for questioning. At first, Joyce denied everything. I barely knew them. I just supervised the tailor shop. But investigators had evidence. Phone records showing she'd been calling a number linked to Richard Matt's contraband cell phone. Testimony from other inmates about her relationships. They confronted her. We know you were involved. We know you smuggled tools. We know you were supposed to pick them up. Joyce broke down. She admitted the sexual relationships. Admitted smuggling the hacksaw blades in frozen hamburger meat. Admitted the escape plan. But she claimed she was manipulated. They told me they loved me. I believed them. I know it was stupid. I know I was wrong. She described the plan. I was supposed to pick them up, drive them away. But I couldn't do it. I got scared. I took pills that night and went to the hospital instead. Indeed, on June 5th, the night of the escape, Joyce had checked herself into a hospital claiming panic attacks. Convenient timing. Joyce Mitchell was arrested and charged with promoting prison contraband, felony, criminal facilitation, felony. She faced up to 8 years in prison. While Joyce sat in jail, Richard Matt and David Sweat were still on the run. They'd headed into the Adirondack Wilderness, massive forest area near the Canadian border. Dense woods, remote cabins, perfect place to hide. The manhunt was costing New York $1 million per day. Over 1,000 law enforcement officers searching. Helicopters with thermal imaging. Search dogs. Border patrol. But the forest is 6 million acres. Finding 2 men in that much wilderness is nearly impossible. Then on June 15th, 10 days after the escape, they caught a break. A cabin owner reported a burglary. Someone had broken in, stolen food, liquor, boots, left muddy footprints. DNA testing confirmed. Richard Matt and David Sweat had been there. The search area tightened. Hundreds of officers flooded that section of woods. But Matt and Sweat kept moving, breaking into cabins, stealing supplies, staying ahead of the search teams. They were surviving. But the net was closing. June 26, 2015. 3 weeks after the escape, a U.S. Border Patrol agent heard a noise in the woods near Malone, New York, close to the Canadian border. He investigated, saw a man in camouflage. The man started running. The agent yelled, "Stop! Federal agent!" The man didn't stop. The agent fired a warning shot. Still running. The agent aimed. Fired. Hit the man twice. Once in the head, once in the torso. The man dropped. It was Richard Matt. He died at the scene. Investigators found him carrying a shotgun he'd stolen from a cabin. He had maps, supplies. He'd been heading for Canada, only 15 miles away. Another day or two and he might have made it. But Richard Matt's run was over. Dead at 48. 20 days of freedom before a bullet ended it. One down. One still out there. June 28, 2015. 2 days after Richard Matt's death. New York State Police Sergeant Jay Cook was patrolling near the town of Constable, New York, about 2 miles from the Canadian border. He saw a man jogging down Route 30. Something about him looked wrong. No car nearby. Middle of nowhere. Odd behavior. Sergeant Cook pulled over. Got out of his cruiser. "Hey, stop!" The man started running toward the tree line. Cook chased him. Yelled, "Stop or I'll shoot." The man didn't stop. Sergeant Cook fired. Hit the man twice in the torso. The man fell. Cook approached cautiously, weapon drawn. It was David Sweat. He was conscious, bleeding, but alive. Cook called it in. "I got him. Sweat is down." David Sweat survived his gunshot wounds. He was taken to a hospital under heavy guard, treated, and transferred back to prison. The manhunt was over. 23 days. $23 million. 1,300 law enforcement officers. 1 escapee dead. 1 recaptured. And it all traced back to a prison employee who smuggled hacksaw blades in frozen hamburger meat. September 2015. Joyce Mitchell faced trial. Her defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim. She was manipulated by 2 professional manipulators. They exploited her vulnerabilities. She made terrible choices, but she's not a monster. Prosecutors disagreed. She knew exactly what she was doing. She smuggled weapons into a maximum security prison. She facilitated the escape of 2 killers. Her actions put the entire community at risk. She's as guilty as they are. The evidence was overwhelming. Her confession phone records testimony from other inmates. The hacksaw blades traced back to purchases she'd made. Joyce pled guilty, avoiding trial, accepting responsibility. At sentencing, she stood before the judge and said, "I made horrible choices. I betrayed my husband. I betrayed my community. I'm so sorry." The judge was unmoved. "You enabled 2 convicted killers to escape. Your actions could have resulted in innocent people being hurt or killed. The manhunt cost millions. You will be held accountable." Sentence: 7 years in prison. Joyce Mitchell was sent to Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, a women's prison in New York. The woman who worked in a prison became an inmate herself. After his capture, David Sweat was interviewed extensively by investigators. He had no reason to lie anymore, no reason to protect Joyce, so he told them everything. "Joyce was easy," David said bluntly. "She wanted attention. We gave her attention. She wanted to feel special. We made her feel special. She wanted to feel loved. We told her we loved her." Investigator: "Did you actually have feelings for her?" David laughed. "No. She was a tool, a means to an end. Richard and I needed someone on the outside to get us tools. Joyce was perfect. Access, vulnerability, stupidity." Investigator: "Did you ever plan to take her with you?" David: "Absolutely not. The plan was always to kill her after she picked us up. We couldn't have a witness. She knew too much." Those words were released publicly. Joyce Mitchell, sitting in her prison cell, learned the truth. The men she thought loved her, the men she betrayed her family for, the men she risked everything for, they never loved her. They planned to murder her the moment she was no longer useful. Comment right now. Do you think Joyce was manipulated, or was she a willing participant? Because this is where it gets complicated. After Joyce's conviction, psychologists and criminologists studied her case. Why does a 51-year-old woman with no criminal history help convicted murderers escape? Dr. Sheila Eisenberg, who wrote a book on women who fall in love with inmates, explained, "Prison romances are incredibly common. Inmates have nothing but time. They study you, learn your weaknesses, say exactly what you need to hear." Joyce fit a specific profile. Middle-aged woman in unfulfilling marriage, low self-esteem seeking, validation isolated, socially working in close proximity to charismatic inmates. Richard and David identified these vulnerabilities and exploited them systematically. The compliments, the attention, the romance. It was all calculated. But here's the complicated part. Joyce wasn't entirely a victim. She's an adult. She made choices. She knew smuggling weapons was illegal. She knew these men were killers. She chose to believe the fantasy because the fantasy felt better than her reality. Psychologists call this willful blindness, choosing not to see warning signs because acknowledging them would destroy something you want to believe. Joyce wanted to believe 2 handsome men loved her, so she ignored every red flag screaming that they were using her. Lyle Mitchell, Joyce's husband, gave an interview after her conviction. "I had no idea," he said. "She'd come home from work. We'd eat dinner, watch TV. She seemed normal. I didn't know she was sleeping with inmates. I didn't know she was planning to run away." Lyle was asked, "Do you still love her?" He paused. "I don't know. She destroyed our family, embarrassed our son, risked people's lives. But we were married 24 years. That doesn't just disappear. Lyle visited Joyce in prison a few times, but eventually stopped. I can't keep doing this, he told reporters. I need to move on. He filed for divorce in 2016. The divorce was finalized in 2017. Joyce Mitchell lost her freedom, her career, her family, her reputation, all for two men who never loved her and planned to kill her. After the escape, New York State launched a full investigation into how it happened. The findings were damning. Security failures, employee bags not properly searched, contractors not adequately screened or supervised, inmates given too much freedom in work areas, tunnel and pipe systems not regularly inspected, staff inmate boundaries not enforced. Recommendations: increased security checks for all employees, better training on recognizing manipulation, more frequent cell inspection, structural improvements to eliminate escape routes, stricter policies on inmate-staff interactions. Clinton Correctional implemented all recommendations. Several supervisors were fired. The prison's security protocols were completely overhauled. But the damage was done. Dannemora had become synonymous with prison escape. The Little Siberia that was supposedly escape-proof had been breached. And it happened because a lonely woman smuggled hacksaw blades in hamburger meat. Joyce Mitchell, released from Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in February 2020 after serving 5 years of her 7-year sentence, released early for good behavior. She's now 61 years old, lives quietly in upstate New York, divorced, working a minimum wage job, mostly stays out of public view. In a 2020 interview, Joyce said, "I'll regret what I did for the rest of my life. I was stupid. I was selfish. I hurt so many people. All I can do now is try to live a quiet life and cause no more harm." David Sweat, currently serving life without parole at Attica Correctional Facility, New York. His in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day, will never be released. He gave a prison interview in 2021 and showed zero remorse. "I almost made it. Another mile and I would have been in Canada. If Joyce hadn't been such a coward and picked us up like she promised, I'd be free right now." Richard Matt died June 26, 2015, killed by Border Patrol during escape, buried in an unmarked grave. Lyle Mitchell, remarried, living in upstate New York, has requested privacy and doesn't speak publicly about the incident. Clinton Correctional Facility, still operating, now has some of the strictest security protocols in the country. Tours the escape route as part of staff training on what not to let happen. The Dannemora escape was the biggest prison break story since Alcatraz. It had everything: murder, romance, betrayal, a massive manhunt, and a middle-aged woman who threw away her entire life for men who never cared about her. Joyce Mitchell isn't a monster. She's a cautionary tale about loneliness, about vulnerability, about how easy it is to believe lies when those lies feel better than the truth. She smuggled hacksaw blades in frozen hamburger meat because 2 killers told her she was beautiful, and she wanted so desperately to believe it that she stopped seeing reality. Richard and David saw her coming from a mile away. They played her perfectly, and when they were done, they planned to kill her. Joyce lost 7 years of her life to prison, but she lost something much bigger: her dignity, her family, and the ability to ever trust her own judgment again. The hacksaw blades are gone. The hamburger meat is long forgotten. The escape is over. But Joyce Mitchell will carry the weight of what she did for the rest of her life. If this story showed you how manipulation actually works in prisons, watch this next video about the death row inmate who ran a murder-for-hire ring from his cell. Some criminals never stop, even behind bars. Thanks for watching. And remember, when something seems too good to be true, it probably is.